Good evening, everyone. Clare Lopez here, filling in tonight, and wanted to bring you something I've been thinking about over the last several weeks, which is a little bit out of the kind of usual presentation we've had here at Sharia Crime Stoppers, but I will tie it all together in this presentation about the coronavirus and how different countries are dealing with it, how the United States is dealing with it, and then how some totalitarian tyrannies are dealing with it. So let us begin with just an overview of what this is, right? So you see a very, almost it looks kind of beautiful, artist's image of the coronavirus. That's the spiky structures you see floating in this photo. So COVID-19, meaning coronavirus disease 19 from 2019, is the name of the disease that's caused by one of a family of viruses that also includes SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, the ordinary flu, and the common cold. All of those are in the same family. They're all coronaviruses. They have differences though. The Chinese researchers released the genome sequence of this one, well, or what they said was this one, COVID-19 being its name now, in January, a couple months ago. The CDC, that is the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, plus other countries are all working with that genome sequence right now for a vaccine and also for treatment options too. Now, the exact causes, the effects, the effective treatment, the prevention, vaccine, all of those things are still out of reach. They're still being worked on, they're still to be determined. But what this disease shows in people who get it are respiratory symptoms. That would be congestion, difficulty breathing, that can range anywhere from very mild, like a mild cold, all the way to so severe that people are dying from this. Now, in late January, just a little more than a month ago, the World Health Organization declared a public health emergency of international concern. And that's because this coronavirus has spread to so many different countries now around the world. Now, just a day later after that announcement, the United States Health and Human Services Secretary Alex M. Azar declared a public health emergency here in the United States. And that is not necessarily just because we have or even may expect to have a huge outbreak of very severe cases, but rather because Secretary Azar knew, and we all expect, that the coronavirus has made landfall here, if you want to put it that way, and will spread to some extent. So they're taking these measures. Now, only a few days ago, being last week, President Trump named Vice President Mike Pence to coordinate all the US government efforts against the coronavirus. I don't know if any of you perhaps watching may have seen this afternoon. Today is Monday, March 2nd, 2020. This afternoon or evening Eastern time, Vice President Mike Pence and senior medical officials from the CDC and the National Institutes of Health held a press conference and took Q&A from reporters and updated us all on all of their efforts, which seemed to be, from what they were telling us, very extensive. They are really on top of this. And I'll tell you one of the most important things that I took away from it, and it gets to the point of this presentation about how a free society operates, is that Vice President Pence made note that the US government has already, and weeks and weeks ago, entered into discussions and also a partnership, really, with private companies, private medical firms, private pharmaceutical firms, and private medical facilities to coordinate nationwide efforts that are led by the US government, but that because of this public-private partnership include a broad range of private enterprises in the health care field around the United States. Now, again, way back in January, this is nearly 2 months ago now, the CDC had already established an incident management system. They knew this was coming. They could see it spreading in China at that point, even early January. By about a month ago in early February, the United States government suspended entry of any foreign nationals who'd been in China during the prior 14 days. US citizens and nationals, however, and their family, who'd been in Hubei province, that's the sort of the center of the outbreak in China, or anywhere in mainland China, actually, allowed entry. US citizens and US nationals family are allowed entry, but they are subject to a 14-day quarantine. And that's because it's understood that this coronavirus may have a 14-day incubation period before even any kind of symptoms show, like a fever or any other symptoms. Again, just a few days ago at the end of last week, the US government formally suspended entry of any foreign nationals who'd been in Iran in the last 14 days. And that is because of the really spread of coronavirus in Iran. That's one of the countries, one of the totalitarian tyrannies we're going to talk about here tonight. And then the CDC also has various lists with levels of travel advisories. These are, recommended you avoid these places, don't go to these places. Certain parts of countries and other places, the entire country, China, Hong Kong, Iran, parts of Italy, parts of Japan, parts of South Korea. Now, the latest numbers from the CDC, and honestly, these are updating almost hourly. I even have to say here on this particular slide, Vice President Pence announced an additional 2 deaths today, just today. I think it was in Washington State from coronavirus. So here you see the total deaths listed as 2. It's actually now 4. But there is a source where any of you can go if you were interested to do that. And it is the cdc.gov website, and then the sub tab of that for the coronavirus and so forth, as you see here with the URL listed on this slide. Now, where'd this thing come from, right? I mean, we know that every year tens of thousands of Americans die from the ordinary everyday flu. Probably millions of Americans catch colds every year and don't die from that. But where did this coronavirus, this variation of the coronavirus come from? Well, bats turn out to be the animal reservoir. You may know that for quite a number of virus kinds of diseases, animals, certain species of animals are the animal host or reservoir. And every now and then, that virus jumps the animal-human barrier and gets out and is transmitted to humans. Well, for this coronavirus, this version of the coronavirus, bats seem to be the animal reservoir. But, that said, the current outbreak does not necessarily have to be tied to that Wuhan, Hubei province, China, live animal market that you've probably heard in news reports or maybe seen on online somewhere. So yes, there is that live animal market there in Wuhan, but the cases that came out of that could be traced to that animal market are later than the first cases, which date back possibly as far back as November of last year, November 2019. So those cases predate in Wuhan, in China, in Hubei province, China, but predate the cases that they can now trace to that animal market. But nevertheless, putting that up there. Now, what we're seeing around the world, and here in the United States specifically too, is person-to-person transmission, or what they call community spread around the world, um, without necessarily coming out of an animal host or even some previously identified center of an outbreak. Perhaps travelers are carrying it. Perhaps that latency period of 14 days has something to do with the spread and it not being recognized before the symptoms then appear, but during which time, 14 days of the incubation period, the person is infected and is able to transmit the disease. That's the point here. In any case, it is less and less certain now where the infection sources are, or are coming from. And also, it should be noted that the global spread is happening despite efforts like quarantines and like travel bans to contain it. The coronavirus is now present on every single continent on Earth except Antarctica. Now, let me mention here this Wuhan Institute of Virology. Not a real good logo up there. It wouldn't post up to my PowerPoint very well, but that's its logo from its website. This institute is located in Hubei province in China, which is sort of in the southeastern part of China. And back in 2015, so around 5 years ago, China opened there at the Wuhan Institute of Virology its very first, well, openly declared BSL-4, Biosafety Level 4, or sometimes called P4, Pathogen Level 4 facility. There is done, at least openly admitted, is done the most advanced virus research in China. Now, here's the thing. This Wuhan Institute of Virology is known to be connected to China's biological warfare program. So we need to make note of that. This is a map that comes from this website that I've highlighted here for you on this slide. It's called the China Highlights website, but I thought it was really a good graphic to show you the places in China where this outbreak is centered and taking place. Here in the purple, in the very middle of the map, that is Hubei province, and you can see Wuhan named on there. That is the place in China where the most cases, at least that they admit to, over 30,000, have been reported. The darker red places are other places where the outbreak is in high numbers. And then, of course, the lighter pink, and even towards the white areas are those areas where the numbers are lower for this outbreak. Again, in China and nearby. I mean, in South Korea, we see here, of course, and Japan over here. So, this is not just confined in East Asia to China either. All right, what are the global implications of this? So I heard Steve Bannon talking in a recent speech about these global implications. If you want to see some really good, insightful comments here, some good, insightful comments about this and the coronavirus's potential impact on the global scene, take a look at Steve Bannon's War Room. Go to it's warroom, I think, .com, but in any case, Steve Bannon, War Room, and you'll see comments. You can also probably look him up on YouTube and find more like that too. But here's some of the things that he talked about. That already, we're seeing global economic effects from the coronavirus because of the scaling back of global travel, and with it, global trade, both taking a very severe hit. And we're not just talking about tourism, but business travel. And of course, than the trade and the commerce that go with that. Um, so sectors like banking, import-export, manufacturing are all registering large disruptions in China and increasingly in other countries around the world too. In Japan and South Korea, for example, some employees have been told to work from home to cut down on, the gathering together of people where the virus could be transmitted. You'll notice that oil and gas prices are down due to shipping and trade disruptions. Now, you might think that's a little, I don't know, counterintuitive, right? But the thing is that what's happening is the production of oil and gas continues apace, but the supplies then are piling up in depots and shipping ports or even on ships, but that can't get to where they're supposed to go because of the travel restrictions. And so there's a glut. There's a glut of oil and gas in many places, and therefore the prices are down. The stock market in the United States had been plunging for the last couple of days. Apparently today, and here's another update, I just saw it, those stock market prices rebounded in the single strongest rebound for a single day in the history of the U.S. stock exchange. So, if you want to keep your blood pressure steady, just don't even look at the Dow Jones. Just don't look at the stock market reports because they're going to be volatile. They're going to go up and down. Yep, 401ks, all that. Just don't look for a while. Okay, so again, from Steve Bannon, and some of the things that he said, as well as other things that I've been seeing and reading. Think about how much of the global economy relies on China for manufacturing, shipping, its supply chain. I mean, everything from little plastic children's toys all the way on up to high tech that'll go into 5G and computer technology. So China is really racked at the moment by economic chaos. I've heard estimates as few as 30% of its workers, even now under orders, have gone back to work. They're not producing right now. And that in turn, because of the supply chain, our dependence on them will affect US and world consumers no later than April, a couple months, well, a month to a little more from now, according to Professor Gordon Chang, whom you may have seen on Fox often. He is a professor at Stanford University in California. So again, I mean, the US and the world economies are highly vulnerable to disruption of these global supply chains for a huge range of products. And as I said, not just 5G technology. As an example of that, you may know that the majority, most of US medicine, pharmaceuticals, prescription medications are made in China. We don't make them here in the United States. And that's why trade advisor here, Peter Navarro, called on the US pharmaceutical and medical supply industry to quickly reduce their dependence on imports. Now, this really could be an advantage, or it could be a positive for US companies to get back into production of some of these things that we haven't been making of late, but that could be ramped up for production, hopefully in a short period of time, weeks to months. But we need to, and maybe this will be a wake-up call for us, that we cannot put all our eggs in one basket, so to speak, and rely on China so much for everything, including really critical things. Children's toys, okay, that's not critical to life as we know it, but pharmaceuticals, we need to bring some of that production back home again. All right, now let me talk about a couple of that's how the US is dealing with this crisis. Now I want to contrast that with the way a couple of tyrannical dictatorships are dealing with this coronavirus crisis. And I'm going to talk about Iran, And we have to some extent talked about China already, but more to come. So Iran, you may know, is getting hit hard. There are a number of reasons for that, partly due to the fact that they refused in the early days or even weeks of this outbreak to curtail travel, including international air travel between Iran and China, and refused in country, in Iran, even after the virus had been identified as breaking out inside of Iran, refused common sense measures like curtailing travel to areas of mass, assembly, like we're going to talk about, let's say, shrines. This has especially to do with Iran, right? Now, the epicenter of the Iran coronavirus outbreak is the seminary city of Qom. That is a city where there are very many theological seminaries, and students, not just from all over Iran, but all over the Shiite world, come to study. Many seminaries are located in Qom, but it's also a pilgrimage site, a holy city in Shiite Islam for pilgrims, and again, Shiites from all around the world. And in addition to that, Iran has a very poor national health care system. They're so busy spending their money on Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terror militias around the world and building nuclear bombs that they really have paid very little attention to the care of their own people, including in the health care sector of society. As of today, the report out of Iran is that there are over 1,500 infected with coronavirus and about 66 dead. Now, that's what they're admitting. This is a totalitarian, authoritative regime. I don't necessarily trust even these numbers, bad as they are, to be the whole story, either on purpose or because their healthcare system and epidemiological capabilities of tracking cases, those are so poor as well. Now, we do know that the regime held back information on the virus's presence and spread in Iran so that their February 21, more than a week ago now, parliamentary elections could go forward. Again, people gathering, people traveling, people moving, coming together in large numbers to vote. And also then that pilgrim flow to Qom would not be disrupted. Well, terrific, because now cases linked to Iran are spreading across the entire Middle East because they didn't tell, they weren't transparent, they didn't allow that information to get out. Those pilgrims came from across the Middle East, Shiite areas of the Middle East. They came on pilgrimage, they came to places like Qom, but not only Qom, Mashhad, and other places too, in Iran. And now they're carrying the virus back with them from whence they came, let's say, across the Gulf, the Persian Gulf areas, Bahrain, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, Bahrain and Kuwait and United Arab Emirates and so forth. And those people in those countries know that these cases came out of Iran. If they're not pissed off at that regime enough already, they sure will be now. All of Iran's geographical border countries, Turkey, Iraq, Kuwait, Afghanistan, Pakistan, have all closed their borders with Iran. That means, again, trade, commerce, severely restricted. But also that is to keep, grip on the spread of the virus outside of Iran, which is having such a terrible outbreak. Now, even among the senior Iranian leadership, some have become infected, and they're still in denial about what's happening. Just today, we got word that Mir Mohammadi, age 71, a member of the Expediency Council. This is one of the highest level government bodies, agencies in the Iranian government. He has died of the coronavirus. In addition to that, we know the deputy health minister of Iran, Iraj Harichi, the vice president, Masume Ibtekar. I don't know if you remember that name. Vice President Masume Ibtekar, she was the spokeswoman for the student gangs that attacked our embassy in Tehran, the US Embassy in Tehran, back in November of 1979. She was that spokeswoman who came out day after day representing the students, the regime, during that hostage crisis. Well, she's sick with it now too. So are a number of MPs, that would be ministers of parliament. You see a couple of those here. This Mojtaba Zohar is the Qom, the city of Qom, member of parliament, but he's also in that parliament the head of the Majlis parliament, National Security and Foreign Policy Committee. All of these and more very senior officials in Iran are sick with this virus. I have seen numbers that the mortality rate for this virus in Iran go as high as 11%. That is a huge number. By contrast, let's say, with the mortality rate even in China, which looks to be in the range of maybe high 0.4%, 3-4% mortality rate. And let's even compare it to SARS, back a decade or more. And the SARS mortality rate was in the range of 7 to 10%, more or less. This one in Iran, as high as 11%. Now, that has to do probably at least as much with the poor state of healthcare in Iran as it does with the virus itself or any kind of genetic modification that may have been done to it to make it more transmissible or more lethal by the Chinese BW program, as at the Wuhan Virology Institute. But the point about Iran here that I'm trying to make is that the government is allowing no transparency. They didn't want to allow, I don't think they still have allowed, any meaningful quarantines, again, of some of those shrine cities. These are places of pilgrimage, large numbers of pilgrims, and this happens year-round, although there are special days, but year-round, pilgrims come to these shrine places, as in Qom, as in Mashhad, a city off on the eastern border of Iran. And the regime does not want to impose any kind of travel ban on those shrine cities. I mean, number one, I guess it has to do with income. Those pilgrims spend a lot of money on their travel and their stays in these shrine cities. But there's more than that. They, at the top levels of the Iranian regime, like the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, are making statements to the effect, this is in Allah's hands, and Allah will take care of us. Okay. But in addition to that, just like yesterday, the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, and the president, Hassan Rouhani, they were actually on video, on camera, joking even, and downplaying the virus as nothing but a Western propaganda tool. Iran has finally, I guess today or maybe over the weekend, begun closing schools and universities. So finally, they're beginning to take some meaningful steps, but it is too late for a lot of Iranians. In China, with the magnitude of the outbreak of this virus, this is the kind of thing that has brought down empires in China in the past. Whether this has that potential or not this time, hard to say right now. But certainly in both places, China and Iran, this virus is posing and will pose a serious challenge to the regime, to its legitimacy, and to its continuity. Now, specifically, around a week ago, again last week, our Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, explicitly criticized China and Iran for suppressing information. And then just a couple of days ago, over the weekend, President Trump offered openly on camera, offered medical assistance to Iran to help to fight the coronavirus outbreak. And he was promptly rejected by the Supreme Leader himself. The Supreme Leader, Khamenei, has condemned the virus, as I said, as an enemy conspiracy. It's all just propaganda. But even as he is downplaying it like that, the regime, as I've said, in Iran has prevented certain health measures that could have curtailed the spread of the virus inside of Iran. But they didn't do it because it's in Allah's hands, right? Or alternatively, if it's not in Allah's hands, it's all a conspiracy of those evil Western powers like the United States. Mahan Air, an Iranian air carrier, and other of its air fleet are still flying all over the world. The Iranian people, naturally, they're afraid, they're angry, they're confused, and if they weren't already in revolt against this regime for so many things over the last 2 years and more, they certainly are now. All right. You know, we've looked at regimes like the Communist parties in China, the Islamic Republic of Iran's regime, as threats for many reasons. Certainly, in Iran's case, for its drive for deliverable nuclear weapons and the ballistic missiles to carry them. China, already a nuclear power that enables North Korea's regime and aids and abets its nuclear weapons program, ballistic missile program. We have looked at Iran as a threat to the region, a geostrategic threat to the Middle East region, because of its support specifically for so many different Islamic Jihad terror groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, the Iraqi terror militias, sometimes called Hashd al-Shabi, support for the Houthis in Yemen, and so forth. Support for the Taliban, by the way, Hezbollah training for the Taliban in Afghanistan, which we've just apparently signed a peace treaty with. See how that goes. But these are the things, that we were concerned about with these two, specifically China and Iran, totalitarian regimes. But maybe this aspect of it, biological warfare certainly, had not gotten the kind of attention that perhaps now we realize it should have. Both China and Iran have very advanced, very sophisticated biological weapons programs, and they do include research on the entire family of coronaviruses, also other things, other viruses, for example, like the hemorrhagic fevers, like Ebola, also things like anthrax and plague and smallpox. These are all highly developed biological warfare agents in both China and Iran. And then Iran, of course, shares in the region with others like Hezbollah and like the Damascus regime of Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian Scientific Research Institute that you might recall President Trump ordering airstrikes against back in, was either, late 2017, I think, because of chemical warfare agent research done there and the use by the Damascus regime of chemical agents against its opposition. But think of biological as well now. But as these two totalitarian regimes that we've seen, the way they've responded, what was uppermost for both of them? It wasn't the welfare of their people, or heavens knows, the rest of the world, people of the rest of the world. Paramount for both was protection of the legitimacy and the reputation of their own regimes, Communist Party of China and the Islamic Jihad regime in Tehran. So the authoritarian type of regime, its objectives are to keep power at home, to stay in power at home, and power projection abroad. And that's both Iran and China. And so what have they done? Attempted to hide information, falsify information, influence decision-making by the WHO, the World Health Organization, shift the blame anywhere but themselves, and avoid criticism either by their own people or by the world community. But now, with that kind of behavior and these biological weapons programs, certainly in China, certainly at the Wuhan Virology Institute, and their careless behavior in dealing with the outbreak, they've now endangered the entire world's population, and in ways that we hadn't really put at the top of our list of concerns prior to this. So with that, let me conclude. I put this together rather hurriedly today at the last minute, so it may be a bit shorter than usual, but I will be glad to take your questions. And let me just note the information you see on this slide here. I am no longer with the Center for Security Policy, but have incorporated as Lopez Liberty, LLC. And if you want to reach me on email with questions or whatever, Clare@theunitedwest.org, with many thanks to Tom Trento and the United West, not just for the Sharia Crime Stoppers webinar program, but for letting me have and use one of their emails. So thank you again all for your attention, and I'll open it up for questions.
Great presentation. A lot of information stuffed in there, Claire. Thank you for all of that, and thank you for coming in at the last minute for us and standing in. We appreciate it. Well, we've got people that are skeptical about the CDC. Is the CDC trustworthy? Do we really want to put all of our faith into what they're doing? How is it that we can go about learning more about what's going on? Is it strictly from the CDC, or what are some other avenues we can go to?
Well, number one, yes, I do trust the CDC. That is our premier lead health and epidemiological organization, agency here in the United States. The National Institutes of Health as well. They have done, as far as I can see, a remarkable job in jumping on this way back in early January, if not earlier, before most of us were even aware this was going to be such a threat as it is now. I would recommend going to their website, and that was given in a couple of places in the slide presentation, but you can go back and look, but it's cdc.gov, I believe, but you can find it by looking that way, cdc.gov, I believe.
Okay.
And I mean, again, listen to the announcements they're making. Look at the information at their website. Their website is chock full of very practical, sober-minded, realistic information about the outbreak and about what individual people, you know, Americans here can and should do in terms of keeping themselves and their families as safe as can be from threat of this virus, which, by the way, because of our world-class healthcare system in this country, the best in the entire world, the impact here is expected to be, at this point in time, much less, certainly than in China, certainly less than in Iran, and probably it will affect us. There will be many people who catch this, but with the world-class health care that we have, probably, hopefully, the mortality rate can be kept down.
Well, one of the things CDC, and I went to it a little bit earlier, and they actually talk about the number of just general flu deaths every year is so high. I was shocked, and even President Trump mentioned it the other night when he was doing his presentation as well. So you can go there, you can get the facts and really learn what's going on. And so I think that's really the best part about all of this. Some other folks are giving us the actual link to Steve Bannon's website. It's warroom.org, warroom.org. You can look at that and pull that up as well. So there's a couple folks that gave us that information.
Good. Thank you.
And the other thing I think I want to mention is that one of the things that I've been hearing in a lot of the presentations that are going on about the coronavirus is that it really is a virus that a lot of people can avoid just simply washing your hands. I mean, it was kind of comical listening to Trump talk about it, but it's true. It's a fact, and the whole mask idea as well is they're not necessarily promoting the ideas of masks either, because there's so many that are not totally sealed. From a doctor that I was listening to this morning, he literally said that the ones that they use in surgeries and stuff are sealed around the entire face. The surgical ones, the high grade ones. So a lot of these people are walking around with it all open here, and they tend to touch their face, and that spreads it as well. So,
well, and even the other thing is that those ordinary cloth ones are permeable, and the coronavirus itself is so small that it can pass right through those
right.
openings in the cloth itself.
Right. All right, we've got if the WHO declares COVID-19 to be a pandemic, what effects would this have on the USA, specifically the Model Emergency Healthcare Act? Not sure what that is. I think that's the correct name, he says. Social distancing, martial law.
Oh, good God, no.
Yeah,
No,
I think that's a little more.
Yeah, the World Health Organization is the body, the international organization that would declare a pandemic. As I said earlier, this has spread to every single continent except for Antarctica, and it has caused mortality at varying rates in all of those places. So there are a few criteria that have to be met before the WHO would make that declaration. But they have certainly already made the declaration that it's a worldwide health emergency. Pandemic would be the next step up from that. What would be the effect on the United States? Well, I would go back to Steve Bannon and our supply chain. I'm not even thinking specifically, of infection and cases in the United States, because given the tens and tens of thousands, I think over 60,000 deaths from ordinary flu every single year, this is not expected to reach that level. I can't say, and nobody can say that it won't, but at the moment it doesn't look like it. So what I'm focusing on here are the economic impacts that are certain to be felt, and that has to do with what I was talking about and Steve Bannon was talking about, the supply chain, and how much so many of our advanced Western industrial countries have come to depend on China for everything, from our medicines to high-tech components to, you name it, look around your house. That's what's going to be affected, is economically and a supply chain, unless, U.S. makers, manufacturers, can gear up quickly. And again, as I said, this should be an opportunity for American manufacturing to get back into the game.
Yep.
That they have, perhaps foolishly let go overly much to China in the past.
I thought I was reading this week as well that Israel was working on a vaccine, was really close to finding one.
Yeah, I saw that too, and I left it out because I don't know exactly how close they are, but yes, the Israelis, among the top, medical researchers in the world, have announced that they think they could be close to a vaccine in around 3 months, I believe. Then it would have to go into trials and approvals, human trials and approvals, which could take some months more. But perhaps by the end of this year, such a vaccine could be available if all goes as the Israelis think it can at this point.
John Rappaport's reports show that the patent of the virus and the vaccine by the Gates Foundation. Will you address this?
Well, what I know is that the Chinese themselves released a genome sequence in January, very quickly after the outbreak was realized. Now, is that genome sequence the one from the Wuhan Virology Institute? Had it been laboratory genetically modified? I don't know the answers to those questions. But that genome was shared worldwide in January, but also now, of course, with the U.S. American citizen victims already, back here in this country, they can take samples from them and sequence that genome, compare it to the one that the Chinese gave, and perhaps at some place like USAMRIID at Fort Detrick, or the CDC or the CDC determine, which is which if they're different, and perhaps track back whether or not that genome had been manipulated in any way. So I left some of that out too, just because I'm not certain of where the research stands right now on those things.
Interesting that Antarctica doesn't have it yet. Could it be the temperatures? Could it be the environment? That would be an interesting research.
Well, I don't think there's a huge flow of tourist traffic or any other kind
That could be
to
it too.
Apparently, from what we're hearing, the virus, and this seems counterintuitive to me, but it's what I'm hearing, tapers off in warmer weather.
Heard that too.
And that is why some are looking forward to the coming months in the Northern Hemisphere anyway, as a time when the virus, might be effectively beaten back a bit.
It seems this time of year is when they've always come out with a lot of viruses going on, everything from SARS to the bird flu to Ebola. It's like the time of year when all of this stuff seems to happen. You think there's any relative reason for that?
Well, again, speaking from the Northern Hemisphere, it might have to do with variable temperatures and climates. I mean, this is the time of year, February, March, even April, when temperatures go up, then they plunge, then it's raining, then it's dry, then, and even a possible late snowstorm. And that kind of weather variability plays havoc with humans. I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah. We've got one that says, has there been any information about closing the southern border especially and not allowing the asylum seekers in? Is there a likelihood that they will try to rush out border again to get medical care?
I have not seen a whole lot of information about the southern border. I need to look more into that. As again, I put this together just today. So I don't have every single thing in there that I might like or I might add in coming days. But certainly the southern border ought to be a place where increased, vigilance. But here's the other thing. The places where the most serious outbreaks have occurred are not the southern hemisphere, not Mexico, not Latin America. It is China, it is Iran, it is other parts of East Asia so far. And so we don't see a big incidence so far of cases south of our border.
What do you think about the possibility that this was a biowarfare project in China gone wrong?
Well, it might be a biowarfare project gone right up until the point when it somehow got out. I really don't think that the Chinese would deliberately have allowed it to escape because obviously the greatest harm is being done to China itself. And as I said, that Communist Party regime, I think, is in very real danger, is threatened by this outbreak. So I don't think that they would have allowed it out on purpose. I do think that they were working on genetic modifications of the coronavirus and its variants inside of the Wuhan Virology Institute. And I think best, speculation to be sure, but that it was some kind of an accident that it got out.
We've got a question on the 14 days being an inadequate time for quarantine period. I think I read somewhere that they even talked about a 21-day. What are your thoughts on that? Who determined it and why?
Well, the World Health Organization and also the CDC as well has agreed, determined that 14 days is the latency period, the incubation period when a person infected is contagious but may not show symptoms. I've not seen anything above 14 days. It's possible that I've missed that, but I've only seen from World Health Organization and CDC the 14-day incubation period.
This one, I've heard that there's a health hazard connection between this virus and 5G, which is bombarding our delicate cells with radiation. China has implemented 5G and Wuhan is where the biggest tower is. Your thoughts?
I am not seeing that connection. Certainly there are very many reasons that Steve Bannon, among others, and the US administration have taken note of, to be concerned about China's technological prowess and progress in 5G technology. And the very concerning fact, especially noted by a good friend and expert David Goldman, about how the United States has failed to keep up either with graduation of STEM specialty experts in math, the sciences, the technologies, and all of that, and thereby in keeping up on the technology, like routers and everything else that goes into high tech IT and 5G technology. You can't tell people don't buy Huawei, don't buy from Huawei, when we don't have an alternative that is as good or as cheap as theirs. And that's the point David Goldman makes repeatedly. You can't fight something with nothing. So there are lots of reasons to be concerned about China's technological prowess, and certainly Huawei's role and affiliated regime, Communist Party regime affiliated companies, and their technology for 5G and our possible reliance on that. But I'm not seeing the connection necessarily. Both are threats. Coronavirus is a threat. 5G technology, if we have to rely on China and Huawei, a threat. But I don't see a connection there per se.
Okay. It was said that this is a quickly mutating virus. One report said that the virus mutated when it got to Iran. A couple of months is incredibly fast. If it continues to mutate, may be difficult to or impossible to produce a vaccine. What have you heard on that?
Yeah, no, that's a very good observation and a true one. Once, no matter what the scientists, the BW, scientists, the weaponeers inside of the Wuhan Virology Institute may have done or may not have done with this virus, now it is out in the wild. And obviously in Iran, the lethality rate is way higher than any other place recorded. Certainly a virus like this mutates when it gets out into the wild, and this one certainly probably is too, mutating. I don't know exactly how. Is it greater mortality? Is it greater transmissibility, greater contagiousness, greater infectiousness? We're not quite certain yet, but obviously a virus out in the wild like this does mutate. And that's something that cannot be controlled. And again, I mean, your questioner is right to say, how do you produce a vaccine effective against a virus like this that may be mutating on the fly within a period of weeks even?
Wow.
Good question.
Good question. We've got somebody asking, I heard there's an element of the AIDS virus in the coronavirus and some are being treated with AIDS medicines. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't know of a connection between the two.
Okay. I have not read or heard anything on that myself. I think that's most everybody wants to tell us their stories on all of this, but I think that's the last question, Claire.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you, Mary, and Dick, of course. Thank you, Sharia Crime Stoppers, Tom Trent in the United West, and all of you for tuning in and listening.
Well, Claire, tell everybody where they can find more of your work. I know you're working, you have a In Defense of Liberty on Newsmax.
That's right. I have a blog at Newsmax where I post, trying to do it about at least once a month, maybe a couple times a month. I am on Twitter at Clare M. Lopez. I'm on Facebook, my name as well. As you see on this slide here, Clare at theunitedwest.org is my email for you. I am going to be working on a website for Lopez Liberty LLC in coming weeks. Don't have that yet, but we'll let you know as soon as I do. I am also online with the Citizens Commission on National Security. That's the successor to Citizens Commission on Benghazi, and post all of my videos and articles there.
Good.
Yeah, work with Jamie Glazoff on videos, Annie Cyrus on videos as well. Just look around, you'll find them.
Yeah, with the Annie Cyrus and Jamie, you're doing a lot with the American Truth Project with Barry Nussbaum as well.
Well, actually not so much any longer.
Okay.
But rather with Annie Cyrus's, let me get the name right here exactly.
Okay.
Live Up to Freedom. Live Up to Freedom is Annie's own online video and website, and I am beginning to post videos with her.
Excellent. Excellent. And also with Worldview Weekend, I think you're doing some stuff too.
That's right. Brannon Howes. Yes, wonderful. Worldviewweekend.com with Brannon Howes. I just finished recording last weekend an 11-part series with him on Hezbollah, soup to nuts. And he is releasing those one by one. They're in segments, 1 to 11. I will be talking with him about turning that into a DVD set as well.
Excellent, excellent. Lots of good work, Claire. Thank you for doing all of that. And let me just tell everybody, tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, we will be bringing you Don Brown. He's a former JAG officer and worked on quite a few books. So we'll be bringing him to you all tomorrow night, and we're excited to offer him. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Claire, for standing in, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Yes?
Yes, we will. I'm definitely looking forward to it. I will be here in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all, and good night.